things. So I'll start off with my general adage, which is that law is where power announces its victories.
Mm.
And
Oh,
what
that's
I
good.
mean by that is, courts basically follow political power. They do not determine political power. They mostly are a reflection of the political circumstances in which they operate. And uh, and so anybody who expects law to any person who lacks power, or any group that lacks power and expects law to come to their rescue, is going to be waiting quite a long time, perhaps forever. And so, in that sense, what the protesters on the university campuses and out in the streets are doing is actually much more important, at least as a primary. What they are doing is formulating and exercising political power. Now it's a complex form. When civil disobedience evokes a response, and it's not always a positive response, and that sort of thing. And it's not an easy path to take, but formulating and exercising that power is actually a prior step to achieving victories in courtrooms, in my experience and belief. Um, so that's kind of how now the other thing that I wanted to say is, though, that if you don't find the law, this is my other adage, the law will find you.
Mm.
In other words, and the law is finding us. Like, if when you talk about this legislation coming down the pike, and I hope you're wrong about the Senate, by the way. I know that there are a few sane people in the Senate, and a few people who, and actually, as you probably are aware, there is some political opposition from the right to
Yeah.
this as
Oh, yeah.
well.
Even Marjorie Taylor Greene was like, "Hey, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
My anti-Semitism, my
Yeah.
anti-Semitic Christian nationalism is bumping into this."
Exactly. Yeah. So we don't know exactly what's going to transpire with that. But the point is that while nobody should stake their hopes in, while people who are marginalized and oppressed cannot stake their hopes in the law, they cannot afford to abandon the field of law, because
Mhm.
it will come out after you and find you and further oppress you. So, it's a field, in I see it as secondary to, political struggle and what goes on in the streets, but important and necessary. And it's something, that I urge people to do. I was a law professor teaching people to do this stuff, uh, because I thought it was worthwhile, not wasting my life. Um,
Do you feel the same way
but
about international law? I mean, every law professor I've ever spoken to says, "Well, it's not really a real thing."
Well, it is a real thing. It's just not the same as domestic law. It is more a form of discourse, and but it's a discourse that's important and influential, and that we cannot afford to ignore. That would be, I mean, now I do think that we're actually at a critical point in, I mean, I would say, since World War II was kind of the big event you know that everybody responded to. It was, not international law didn't start with World War II, but it was, in the aftermath of World War II, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had the Genocide Convention. We had the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We had, the development of international humanitarian law, which protects civilians in times of war, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a big sort of, and the whole concept of human rights and NGOs defending human rights around the world. All of these things were post World War II developments. I think we're at a turning point where people have seen the hypocrisy and the weaknesses and the dysfunction of international law and international institutions, and we could be at a point of people, throwing up their hands and saying, "Screw it." I mean, we're not going to take this interpretation of international law. Actually, what the U.S. calls it, what our leaders call it, they don't refer to international law. They refer to the international rules-based order.
Yes.
And you get, what is that? What are they talking about? The international rules-based orders. They don't say international law. They
Why?
don't, because they know that it's not international law and that it is basically a construction of their own ideology and their own sort of projection of U.S. interests, of U.S. Imperial interests. That's really what it is. It's kind of, China is threatening the international rules-based order in its sort of aggressive act in the South China Sea. Well, we aren't signatories of the Law of the Sea Convention, so we can't say, oh, they're violating international law, because we haven't even signed the damn thing.
Right.
So obviously the Antony Blinken bemoans attacks on hospitals in the Ukraine, as well he should, and about Gaza, we're concerned. We're very concerned.
Right.
We've expressed our concern, and we're consulting with the Israelis to see if they're targeting, and all that kind of. We're providing them actually intelligence on targeting so that they can avoid hitting civilians. That's their approach in the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, there are 3 cases before the International Court of Justice that relate to Palestine. There's South Africa versus Israel, which in their hearings tomorrow on a new request for provisional measures in that case, tomorrow and Friday. There's Nicaragua versus Germany. Nicaragua charging Germany with complicity in Israel's genocide. And then there's the General Assembly request for an advisory opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's long-term occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, amounting to what many people believe is a system of apartheid. And I really do think that the International Court of Justice, its credibility is on the line with these 3 cases. And its rulings actually, have been somewhat encouraging. I mean, if you go back to 2004 in the Wall case, the International Court of Justice was kind of incredible in its judgment in finding that the Israeli separation barrier was illegal and should be dismantled. And it voted that way by an overwhelming majority. As I recall, the numbers were, there were 15 regular judges on the court, and the votes were like 13-2 and 14-1 on almost all of the points of law that they voted on.
Does it matter? How much does it matter, though, right? Because that's my word.
That's right. That decision has. I mean, it was the decision that actually, or it was the lack of response, the lack of enforcement of that that ICJ decision on the Wall in 2004 that led to the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in 2005 by 171 Palestinian civil society organizations. So it had that consequence. It didn't have a direct legal consequence. You're right. And this is, of course, the weakness of the international legal system. The only enforcement, the only direct enforcement. If individual countries don't take it on their own initiative to enforce and to abide by the judgments of the International Court of Justice, it's up to the United Nations Security Council to enforce that judgment. And of course, you know what the issue there is. It's, the US. It's not like other countries don't also exercise vetoes, but the United States, in respect of Israel,
We have a
is
singular
the one.
commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like The Godfather. We're like Tom Hagen. Like we have one client.